Hey guys, still here. Today, quickly reviewing a Soviet Union airborne deck that was sent in by Judas Israel. He says, I only use this deck in 2v2 or 3v3 and most of the time it's destruction with moderate income. Usual maps are Plungin Valley, Hell in a very small place, Tropic Thunder, Apocalypse Imminent. Well, just about any good map for a 2v2 which aren't too small. And that's definitely an important point for an airborne deck. You don't want it to be too small or your aircraft will have nowhere to go. The goal of the deck is not to take positions real quick with helo rushes, rather it is to get an air supremacy by eliminating AA with seed bomber combinations. Then let the VDV and the BMP, transports and tanks, advance after the bombers and anti-tank planes cleared most of the enemy forces. He wants to know, he says usually I'm doing quite fine with this deck. The big problem seems to be killing heavy tanks without planes, because of too much AA in the area. And fighting too much good infrared AA like Crotals and Chaparrals. So he would like to be advised on how to improve this deck against tanks. That's what I'm reading between the lines here. Now let's have a look at this deck. It's 2v2, 3v3 in maps that are moderately big. It's not those huge Asgard type maps, but slightly smaller. Now, starting at logistics, I think that this setup can be improved, because if you do have a lot of helicopters, and he has quite a few, then these things are really going to chew into your logistics units if you don't have a FOB. The Mi-6, while it is a nice resupply vehicle, is also very expensive, a very easy target, extremely easy to spot, and generally I don't recommend using these. Therefore I'm going to switch this one out for a FOB. And this should give his helicopters all the resupplies that they need to keep going and keep fighting. Moving on to infantry. He still says that his main problem with this deck is tank warfare, or rather anti-tank warfare. And considering that your infantry is decent but not fantastic, whereas the Conqueror's M is quite the good anti-tank unit, I think that we're going to have to rely on transports, and that's what he has the BMD-3 for. BMD-3, fantastic unit, same missile, Conqueror's M, except that the platform is way more mobile than any kind of infantry unit could be. He has 18 of these. I don't really see any cheap or cheap-ish spammable infantry, and that could be a problem. See, if he would get into an engagement where he needs a lot of infantry, then this VDV unit for 35 points is the cheapest unit that he can reliably spam. And that's kind of expensive, so I would definitely go with a group of VDV, preferably in the BTRD. Unfortunately, all of those are already engaged in transports for Spetsnaz. Actually, two groups of Spetsnaz there. Let's have a look at the Spetsnaz later. First, we're going to send 13 units of VDV veteran in BTRD. Now we have a 25 point unit. It's still rather expensive. And unfortunately we don't really have too many options other than that, since you don't get access to Motostrelkis. I think that some of the other units could also be quite handy, such as the Sapri. Sapri 85 also have the same weapon as the Spetsnaz, but they're quite a bit cheaper. They're also a lot less effective and a lot less survivable, but you're paying 20 points in the cheapest variant instead of 40 points in the cheapest variant. And that is something to be considered. Now, considering that these are mostly anti-infantry units, I'm going to give them the standard BTRD. Go with 7 of those. And then finally, a group of Spetsnaz in... That's going to be a question which. I'd say the BTRD robot. It still has an ATGM. It's not fantastic, but it is an ATGM, so it can help with his anti-tank goal. 9 of those. Now, as far as VDV go, we have a load of these guys. We have 27 elite and then 13 veterans. So that is way more infantry than we would actually need. At least, it depends on how you play, but if it's destruction, then going through this much infantry is really going to hurt. So I'm going to consider taking out one of those and instead investing that in the helicopter tab. Because something like the Mi-24P can really help out with your anti-tank effort as well, in a pretty cheap-ish option. So let's delete one of the VDV-90, and then invest that in a helicopter later. The rest of the deck looks okay. You got the Gorno Strelky 90 Unfortunately, these units are only airborne transports, and I don't really use them. Because for 85 points, they're quite the big investment. They're a decent infantry unit, not fantastic by any stretch of the imagination. Their anti-tank weapon is really quite hard hitting at 26 armor penetration. That gives it more armor penetration than the Concours M. But the range is not very good. At 1575, that means that if you get detected by the vehicle that you're trying to kill, you're going to get killed off way before you actually get that first missile on target. And if we can get these guys in a cheaper transport, then I think they suddenly become a lot more appealing. And the cheaper transport would be the Mi-8T or the Mi-8 I don't particularly find this thing much of an improvement over the Mi-8T. Rocket pods, 32, 57mm rockets. This thing has 64, so that is an improvement, but the machine gun, it doesn't really amount to much. The Mi-8 MTV is an interesting alternative, and it still makes it quite a bit cheaper. So let's go with this one. And the reason I'm going with this one is that it has those 122mm rockets, which do 4 HE, versus only 1. And trust me, if this is starting to fire your infantry, you're going to notice, and not in a good way. Finally, he has some Iglas in here. I'm not sure why he didn't go with the Igla N. The Igla N does have a bit more HE, but also suffers in availability. His Iglas currently have 7 guys in one card. This will give you 4. Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter that much. Let's stick with the standard Igla. Supports then. We have 8 Strela 10Ms. This is pretty much the main anti-air force group that he gets. And unfortunately, this deck just does not have a lot of anti-air. You just don't get a lot of options. The Strela 1M or the 10M. And the 10M is way superior to the 1M. 10M gets 12 missiles, better range, better accuracy. It can even fire those things on the move with the same accuracy as sitting still. And it's generally a way better vehicle. It is slower though. The 1M has an off-road speed of 100 versus 60. So if you're going to try and rush something, then this might be better. But for now, I think having 8 of these will work. Then he's bringing in a load of Nona SVKs. I'm not sure why you'd want to have 6 of these at Veteran, or actually at Hardened. The reasoning behind my thinking here is that my mortars are there for ground support. And they don't need to be particularly snipey. Whereas the more veterancy you pour onto these things, the more this dispersion goes down. And the more they turn into snipers rather than bombardment units. Not only that, but you're also investing quite a few activation points in this. So I'm going to actually take out both. Get 1 card of 7 trained 2S9 Nonas. And this gives me more firepower for less cards. And I still save 2 activation points. Now in tanks, you don't get any kind of diversity. BMP 685, that's it. It's a decent unit for 30 points. Armor penetration at 11 is not bad. Especially the accuracy for 30 points is very good. It fires kinetic rounds, so the closer you can get to a target, the better. And it is actually quite good at maneuvering. 70 kph off-road, medium optics. It can swim, although not very quickly, at 35 kph. And it has quite a nice amount of autonomy. So definitely a unit that you want to have in here, because it really fulfills a couple of roles that other units cannot do in this deck. Moving on to Recon, where we have the BRDM-3. Great Recon unit, very, very nice autocannon on top of that thing. 40% accuracy is something that most autocannon wielding units can only dream of. Then, KA-52. Of course, this is pretty much mandatory in an airborne deck. These things are just a fantastic combination with any of the other helicopters. The Plamia is one I'm not too sure about. Because the Plamia, while it does have exceptional optics, is quite expensive, very fragile, as with most exceptional optics units, and you only get 4. Now they are, I'm not going to say spammable, but at 50 points they're okay. But I won't be using them. I don't think they add enough in the sense of spotting or special capabilities that they're worth their 50-point price tag. At least not in this deck. I am considering bringing the Mi-24K, because this thing also has exceptional optics, is more survivable, has a whole load of rocket pods. I mean, just look at that monster. Has the Yak B, quite handy against infantry, and is really, really fast, 330 kph. It is by no means the same type of attack helicopter as the K-52. K-52 has a completely different role, in the sense that this is a sort of anti-ground or anti-radar scout. That's the way I consider it. It is quite stealthy. Actually, I'm comparing the K-52 to the K-52. That really doesn't make any sense. The K-52 does have medium stealth. The Mi-24K does not. And that does give you some options with the K-52. And generally, with an airborne deck, I find that I want to have more aerial recon. Now, the Mi-24K is a good option, as I mentioned. The Mi-8R is decent. It also has exceptional optics, and it's quite a bit cheaper. The Mi-2 I would stay away from. At 40 points, they are very cheap for a recon helo. They're really, really slow at 200 kph. Their strength of 4 is really underwhelming. It takes 1 Manpads team, so that could be 1 Stinger missile, and this thing is down. Not a good thing. For now, I'm going to go with the Mi-8R. If you find that you want to have another attack helicopter you can throw into your attack helicopter section, then go with the Mi-24K. Finally, we have the Spetsnaz Vmf. Really, really nice sniper team. Quite the expensive transport though, at 55 points, and I don't particularly find these things to be performing very well. So let's make that a cheaper option in the form of the Ka-29TB, which still has quite an offensive rocket pod assortment, and it comes with an autocannon. The problem with the autocannon is that I believe it is mounted onto the hull. Now, unfortunately, I cannot quite find it on the unit. Normally you see something protruding from it, but other than the air sensors, I don't really see it. Unless this is it. Yeah, I think that's it. You see that? There it is. It's a decent weapon. This unit will allow you to engage quite a few targets. It's not great against vehicles though, so make sure you use this helicopter mostly against infantry. And then we have the Spetsnaz GRU in current transport of the Ural 375. It's really the best option that you get for these guys, considering that everything else is quite expensive. Now, while I did mention that the BRDM is a really nice unit, I am reconsidering it. Because while it does have good optics, it's also 35 points, and I prefer to have something that has spam capability, as it were. And the UAZ 469 does have spam capability. So I'm going to be switching this one out. This gives you 13 really, really cheap recon units, and the thinking behind that is that if you can spot the enemy using these, you can then engage them with your airstrikes. Whether it's going for a seed strike, a bomber run, whatever you think that you need to kill that target. And you can get pretty much 3.5 of these for the price of one BRDM-3. It also means that you don't have any autocannons to back up your infantry, short of those mounted on the BMD-3, so beware of that. Moving on to vehicles. ASU-85M. I'm not sure that I would really use these, especially considering that you got the Jalo, which is way better. If you want to suppress infantry, then the BTR-152E can do that same job quite effectively as well. Suppression of this thing is actually higher with the main gun than the D70 main gun on the ASU-85M. It's a bit faster, has way more autonomy, does not deal with tanks very well at all, whereas this thing can engage some transports. But I find that I prefer this thing lately. Fortunately, he already has one in those, or one of those in the deck. So we can actually delete that one. And how about a cheap anti-tank jeep? Like that. You can spam these things around. Not that much, you only have 7, but they're workable. Great ATGM, a great ATGM mounted on it. Very fast platform, great autonomy. Of course, being a wheeled vehicle, great road speed as well. And if you find that you have an open area that you want to lock down, especially considering his desire for dealing with tanks, then I think that this unit would be a good unit to do it. Moving on, helos. 2 Akula attack helicopters. 3 Mi-28s. Now these things are always changing. It's not that they get changed every patch, but the Akula used to have longer range missiles and fire them one by one, whereas nowadays they fire these 2x2 and have sacrificed some of the range. Once again, these helos may look similar, but they have different roles, or at least that's the way I consider them. I find the Akula to be a sniper. It is a really good anti-tank unit, and you fly this in, you take out 1 or 2 high value targets and you get the hell out. The Mi-28 is actually what I consider more of a forward, let's say a forward advance. This thing is going to be right up there with your attack, engaging infantry and vehicles alike, with the S-13 against the infantry and the Attacker V against any kind of armored vehicle that you might come up against. The stats on these missiles, the Attacker and the Vicar, are quite similar. The accuracy on the Vicar is better if you're stable. If you're moving, then the Attacker becomes better. Armor penetration is slightly in favor of the Vicar, whereas the Attacker is only lagging behind by 1 point, and the Attacker has more missiles, 16 versus 12, so pick your targets wisely. And of course it has Iglas, whereas the other one has S-13s. So it's nice to have them both in here as a sort of generally well-rounded toolkit. 3 Mi-24Vs against air threats, as well as supporting an advance, but let's face it, these things are mostly there for their Iglas. VPs, usually, if you manage these things well, they can perform as well or better than an Mi-28. Because these things have a more diverse attack pattern with those rocket pods. This can really mess up someone's assault using infantry, whereas the Mi-28 is going to fire 10 rockets and then go, oh shit, I'm out. This thing doesn't have that. So this thing can keep firing. And finally he has the Mi-4A in there. Again, a whole load of rocket pods. Same type, the S-80FP, but it's way cheaper. It's also way slower at 180 kph, whereas the Mi-24 VP comes in at 330. So don't expect these things to patch any holes in your line quickly. But you can keep them around as a sort of back guard, or if you're pushing against a lot of infantry, these things will really help you out. Air tab, this is where the money has to be made, mostly. IL-102, great bomber, not particularly fast, and its ECM of only 10% means that most missiles will actually hit this target, so be careful. 2 Su-27 PUs at trained. You could go with 1. It depends on the amount of income that you're going with, but if it's moderate income, then you might not be able to save up for 2 Su-27 PUs. So I would actually prefer to have 1 elite here. Next up, MiG-25 BM Seed Aircraft. Fantastic seed unit. Su-27M, if you absolutely positively need a tank dead. MiG-29S, general bomber, nice to have. Su-24M, dedicated anti-infantry bomber. I think he has a few too many all-round bombers here, because you got the IL-102, you got the MiG-29, and these things pretty much drop the same type of bomb. Actually, it's exactly the same type of bomb, it's just, it looks different. Why would they use a different icon for that? Especially considering it's the exact same weapon. Anyway, in this situation I would go for the 29S because it's way more survivable than the IL-102. So I'm sorry, but you're out. So we got this thing against moderate targets and this thing against light targets, where it's basically a carpet bomber. Su-25T, fantastic aircraft, but make sure that before you bring this thing in that any kind of AA is dead. Or at least that you have it suppressed with either the Su-24 or the MiG-25 BM, because if you don't, then you're suddenly throwing away 200 points. Be careful. Yak-141, to back up some of those air superiority fighters that we have, such as the PU, looks good. Then, let's go over it. We got Seed. Let's actually rearrange this so that I have all of those things together at the same location. Seed aircraft, 1 and 1. So we got Seed, we got ASFs, we got General Bombers. These two, I'm going to put these things together as well. That was the Su-25T. And the MiG... Come on, no, the Su-27M, where are you? Where are you? Here you are. Su-27M is a really expensive option to be using against tanks. It will generally kill them, but if you kill a tank and you lose this jet, you're still going to be in a way lot of trouble. And therefore I would recommend going with another anti-tank plane, such as the MiG-27M. It has really, really good stats, quite fast, quite decent ECM for 115 points. The missile is quite good, but it is semi-active, so you're going to have to be looking at the target, otherwise you won't be able to hit it. MiG-27, slightly less range, slightly less ECM, and the MiG-27K, better missile, fire and forget, but again, ramping up the price tag. So I'm going to go with 2 of these at hardened. Now that leaves me with 3 points to try and flesh out this deck against threats such as tanks. And first let's visit this section and go for the Mi-24P. Again, a really nice all-round attack helicopter, which has way less of a price tag than all of those expensive 150 or 130 plus helicopters. Support we don't really need. We don't really need any more support, although this can be a worthy addition. It's cheap and spammable, can be used to support your infantry, can shoot down helicopters, although it's not really likely to do that at 10% accuracy. Tanks we don't have anymore, so that leaves us with the vehicle tab, which I don't need to be using anything else from either. So instead we're going to go for infantry and another helicopter. Infantry, considering that the tank issue was his real problem, I'm going to go with yet another card of concourse. So let's take these out and then add 2 at veteran, make them a bit more accurate. And finally go back into the helo tab, where we don't really have anything left. So I'm going to go with another Mi-24P. And I think that this will round out the deck quite nicely. As far as shipping goes, he has Sovereign, Udaloy. That's all really, really expensive. Personally, I love seeing these things, but I hate using them because they are so expensive and it's incredibly difficult to make back the value that you pay for these things. The Zhangyu 3 does not have that problem. So personally, I always prefer to use multiple cards of Zhangyu 3s, because these are at 160 points, really only to kill 1 or 2 aircraft, and you made back your investment. They're also very good at defending themselves. Another unit that could be useful here, not the Su-27K. What's the capacity that we don't really have at the moment? Escort ship, a Tarantula maybe. Yeah, accuracy is a bit on the low end. The OSA. It's unfortunately only a coaster, which does mean you can get the OSA M missile quite close to shore for 120 points. And this means that you can get about 4 times as many AA missiles close to shore as you would with any other platform. So those could be handy. And for general anti-shipping, we could go with a Mosquet. Again, decent, not fantastic. Komar, I don't really like them. They only fire 2 missiles. If they hit, they're going to leave a ship completely devastated. if they miss, you're going to be spending quite a bit of resources getting that missile backloaded. So generally I tend to stick with Jiangyu 3s. Command ships. Najins, not very good. Looters, really not very good. So in that case, I would prefer to go with something like this. Sovereign Many, but be really careful if you pull this thing in. It's not particularly likely to make back its investment. It does have a whole load of rounds. It fires 36 rounds a minute, and this means that with its ammo supply it can keep firing for 10 minutes straight. HE power is 8, accuracy not very good, but what it does do quite nicely is suppress infantry and tanks. And I mean suppress, not kill. Especially tanks are very hard to kill with this thing. Anyway, for me that concludes the deck review. If you have any more suggestions on how you would improve this deck against tanks, that's the main goal, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching, have a good day, and I'll see you soon for more videos.